Hello everyone and welcome to another session on Dalit writing. Today we'll discuss Module 4. In Module 4, as per your curriculum, 3 autobiographies have been prescribed for a non-detailed study. So what I have done is that I have divided Module 4 into 2 parts, like the previous modules. In part 1, we'll start off with a general introduction on Dalit autobiographies, and we'll also discuss Sharankumar Limbale's Dalit autobiography titled The Outcast. In part 2, we'll discuss 2 more autobiographies, one by Prakash Valmiki and one by Balbir Madhopuri. So this is how the module 4 is divided in this lecture. So let's begin by discussing Dalit autobiographies in general and also their significance in Indian literary context. Autobiography is a popular genre in the West, but in the context of Indian literary tradition, autobiographies are relatively new. It started appearing only from the 19th century onwards. Though there existed several personal narratives in the past, like Banarsi Das' Artha Kadhanaka, published in 1641, autobiographies were established as a genre in the 19th century. For instance, Shahid-e-Rana, published in 1897, Ramabai Saravasti's Ramabai, the High Caste Hindu Woman, which came out in 1890, Lala Lajpat Rai's The Story of My Deportation, published in 1908, Nehru's autobiography that came out in 1936, etc. It was the anti-colonial movement in India that encouraged the upper caste people to write their autobiographies, and they did so to celebrate their self as an act of protest against the colonial period. However, the post-independent India saw the Dalits coming forward with autobiographies, but this time it wasn't written celebrating their self, but as an act of self-assertion, as resistance against oppression they faced. Not just that, Dalits realized that in the mainstream literature they have always been ignored, never mentioned or talked about, and therefore they decided to write their own lives so that at least now they are heard. It was their need. Some of the major Dalit autobiographies include Sharankumar Limbale's The Outcast, Om Prakash Valmiki's Joothan, Lakshman Gaikwad's The Branded or Uchelya, and Bama's Karukal. By writing these autobiographies, they were trying to bring their issues and their problems and all the sufferings they faced for a discussion to a national or global platform, which in turn asks for resistance against any more atrocities or oppression. So, this is what differentiates a Dalit autobiography from other autobiographies. They are not celebrating their self because their selves were long ignored and never acknowledged. We can even draw parallels between Dalit autobiographies and feminist autobiographies or even the black narratives because they all talk about something similar: oppression. So, this is what distinguishes them from other autobiographies in the mainstream literature. So, you have to keep this thing in mind before we start discussing the 3 autobiographies in this module. So, now let's start with the first autobiography, Dalit autobiography that is prescribed for you, Sharankumar Limbale's The Outcast. But before that, a word about the author. A Marathi author, poet, and literary critic, Sharankumar Limbale has authored more than 40 books. Akkarmashi is his autobiography that came out in 1984 and is written in the Mahar dialect of Maharashtra. Akkarmashi literally means half caste, or in Malayalam, Arthajati. The book was translated to English by Santosh Bhumkar and was published by the Oxford University Press under the title The Outcast. Following the publication of the English translation, Akkarmashi was translated into numerous other Indian languages. A Malayalam translation is also available Mathrubhumi Publications, they have come out with a Malayalam translation of Akarmashi. According to Limbale, Akarmashi or the Outcast is not just his autobiography, but the story of every Dalit. There is another work by Limbale titled Towards an Aesthetics on Dalit Literature, and this work came out in 2004, is considered to be a seminal work in the discipline of Dalit studies. According to Limbale, Dalit literature is distinct. It's different from other genres of literature for its use of language and also for the portrayal of its heroes. The language they use in their writings is unrefined and unsophisticated, unlike the standard literary language of the upper caste. Moreover, he dislikes the so-called standard literary language and refuses to follow that because that's not the language spoken by the Dalit. Limbale believes that with Dalit studies emerging as a genre, it is definitely going to revolutionize the literary field. So now let's start discussing the autobiography titled The Outcast. The Outcast is the story of an untouchable family that belonged to the Mahar community, told through the eyes of Sharan, the protagonist. It's the author's life story. He begins the autobiography by saying that it's the caste of an individual that decides everything about his life. The clothes he'll wear, the food he'll eat, the person he'll marry. Everything depends on his caste. This autobiography is a groundbreaking work in the world of Dalit writing just because of its sheer courage to keep the reality of their lives bare in front of the world. The narrative is in a personal descriptive style that gives it an easy access into the minds of the reader. Limbale was an illegitimate child of a high caste patil, and his mother a poor untouchable woman. As a result, he never had a single caste that he could claim his own. He neither belonged to the Maratha caste nor to the Mahar caste completely. He was a half caste, an Akarmashi. The trouble started popping up when he was taken to the school. School authorities refused to take in the child, claiming him to be illegitimate. Since his father lived in a mansion and his mother in a leaky hut, there was nobody to be called his guardian. Even his grandmother was denied Sharan's guardianship. And above all, his last name was not accepted, because that belonged to his father, who was a high caste. This unfair treatment continued due to his fractured or broken identity. He couldn't get married for a long time because his blood was not considered pure by others. He was an outcast, an Akarmashi. There are moments in the book when, as a reader, you feel responsible for the condition of the Dalits. He describes how difficult it is to be born a Dalit, let alone live like one. They depended on the upper caste despite the insults hurled at them incessantly. They lived in bus stands. It was home according to Limbale. They ate the leftover food and used discarded clothes by the upper caste. He blames the god for giving stomachs to Dalits. It's because they have stomach they feel hunger. And feeling hungry is a luxury for a Dalit who cannot afford food at least once a day. This point is an eye-opener for the reader. One is not able to read further because that's the kind of guilt that engulfs you. We're all playing part in each other's story. A Dalit is not someone who belongs to a lower caste. He or she is just like any other fellow human. It's when you realize that we are all made of the same sweat and blood, we realize the futility of the caste system that we have made. It's these junctures in the story that stirs your thoughts and makes you think. To feed their hunger, they end up stealing, they end up begging. Because the so-called upper caste deny the opportunities to grow, and we blame them for stealing and begging. Do you remember Madhu, who stole to feed his hunger? He was beaten to death. And we, the proud inhabitants of the literary state of Kerala, is yet to recover from the guilt and shame it has caused. In The Outcast, Limbale says that they were always under suspicion, and in case of a mishap, they were beaten up. He gives instances from his school days where untouchability was practiced in a day to day life. He refers to the sitting arrangement of the students in the picnic, where the high caste were allowed to sit along with the teachers under a banyan tree, while the Mahar students were asked to sit under another tree. He says, boys and girls from the higher caste like Svani, Brahmin, Marwadi, Muslim, Maratha, fishermen, goldsmith, and all teachers, about 100 or so, sat in a circle under a banyan tree. We, the Mahar boys and girls, we were asked to sit under another tree. The high caste ones said a prayer before eating, which didn't make any sense to us. Limbale gives another instance of insult and grim reality of his childhood. Being a Dalit, he was given the leftover food by the upper caste children, and he, being hungry like hell, gobbles up anything given. There is another instance where Limbale tells they faced untouchability in their day to day lives. Even the river was divided, and the lower stream for Mahars. Another instance where a Balbir refuses to touch his hair for being a Dalit is another eye opening moment for the reader. The Outcast is filled with such instances that gives a shocking account of their lives. However, in India, with leaders like Phule, Gandhiji, and Ambedkar taking up the issue of Dalits, the scenario had already changed. Even the rise of the genre of Dalit writing and all those progressive thoughts, protests, and movement that followed were the result of their influence. A significant change that came about was the change in the attitude of the Dalits. They began refusing menial jobs and decided to educate themselves to free from the grip of this casteism. Limbale says that it was his urge to get educated against all these odds that gave him hope for the future and even writing his autobiography. In the World Conference Against Racism held in 2001 in South Africa, Dalit activists and intellectuals introduced a case for recognition of caste based discrimination in India as similar to the racism in the West. With the Dalit issues getting noticed in the various global platforms, changes emerged. In The Outcast, Limbale poses a few questions. How is a person born with his caste? How does he become an untouchable as soon as he is born? How can he be a criminal? The Outcast by Sharankumar Limbale is a compelling read. It stands out not just because it's an autobiography by a Dalit, but it is also an account of the history of Dalits, the gruesome reality they faced, the struggles they have fought and they continue to fight. These autobiographies form an integral part of Dalit literature because they are vivid personal narratives asserting their identities and that holds promise and hope for an egalitarian future. In this lecture, we'll discuss two more autobiographies. The first autobiography is Om Prakash Valmiki's Joothan or A Dalit's Life and Balbir Madhopuri's Changiya Rukh or Against the Night. But before we begin analyzing the two autobiographies, I hope you remember the points we discussed on Dalit autobiography in the previous lecture, because it is very important to know the context in which Dalit autobiographies were born. It is very important to understand why they are different from the usual autobiographies in the mainstream literature. If you haven't, please listen to the previous lecture before you continue with this lecture. We will begin with Om Prakash Valmiki's autobiography titled Joothan or A Dalit's Life. Om Prakash Valmiki, an Indian Dalit writer and poet, was born in Chuhra family in Muzaffarnagar district of Uttar Pradesh. He is well known for his autobiography Joothan or, in English, A Dalit's Life. Besides Joothan, he has published three collections of poetry,
Sadiyon Ke Santaap, that came out in 1989, Bas Bahut Ho Chuka, that came out in 1997, and Ab Aur Nahi, that came out in 2001, and two collections of short stories titled Salam, that came out in 2000, and Guspetiye, that came out in 2004. He was a prominent writer in Hindi. He has also written a history of the Valmiki community titled Safai Devta, that was published in 2009. He was the president of the first Dalit Writers Conference held in Nagpur in 1993. Though he was a much acclaimed writer, there was a lot of apprehension preceding the publication of his autobiography, Joothan. A lot of people advised him against publishing it, but it was his will and courage that supported him throughout, and Joothan was finally published in the year 1997. It is the account of the author's journey as a Dalit in the newly independent India in the 1950s. Growing up in a family where he is the first ever person to go to a school, he says it was challenging. In an interview with Suresh Chandu Dwivedi, Valmiki says, "The life struggle of Dr. Ambedkar and his ideology prepared the emotional base of my poems, short story, and autobiography." Joothan was written in Hindi and it was translated to English by Aruna Prabha Mukherjee. Now let's take a look at the autobiography, Joothan, a Dalit's Life. In the preface to his autobiography, Valmiki gives the reason behind writing his autobiography. He says, quote, "Dalit life is excruciatingly painful, charred by experiences that did not manage to find room in literary creation." Quote unquote. And if you look at the title itself, Joothan refers to the scraps of food, leftover food that usually goes into the garbage. Valmiki says that for centuries, Dalits have been forced to accept Joothan. The image encompasses the pain and humiliation they have been through for ages. According to Valmiki, the mainstream literature owned by the upper caste always portrayed the Dalits as mute, pathetic characters who were unable to express themselves. Joothan thus becomes an act of protest here. By writing an autobiography, Valmiki was trying to prove the upper caste men wrong. Dalits, if given an opportunity, has the ability to express themselves. Joothan itself is an example of this. It shares the incredible journey of a boy born into misery and his journey to prominence. Valmiki's Joothan depicts the untouchable self that he has experienced since childhood and continued even after becoming a writer of prominence. He says that it was in school where he came face to face with the harsh reality of untouchability. Before he joined the school, untouchability was declared illegal in the post independent India. But the reality was different. He writes, quote, "Gandhiji's uplifting of the untouchables resounding everywhere. Although the doors of the government schools had begun to open for untouchables, the mentality of the ordinary people had not changed much. I had to sit away from others from the class, that too on the floor. The mat ran out before reaching the spot I sat on." Quote unquote. In his autobiography, Valmiki, unlike a lot of other writers of his age, is critical about Gandhi's role and methods for the so-called Dalit emancipation. He says, quote, "From textbooks to the media of communication, they were all beating the drums about Gandhiji. After reading Ambedkar, I had realized that by naming the untouchables Harijans, Gandhiji had not helped them to join the national mainstream, but has saved the Hindus from becoming a minority." Quote unquote. He continues to give instances of social ostracization despite being good at studies. Valmiki says How during examinations, when they felt thirsty, they were not allowed to take water on their own. Instead, they cupped their hands and the pune would pour water into their hands. Valmiki is a surname that Om Prakash decided to retain along with his name. He was well aware that by keeping a surname like Valmiki, everyone would know that he belonged to a lower caste. Valmiki says that some people saw this as an act of courage, and some thought that he was being foolish. But to him, holding on to his surname was a way of self assertion, just like the autobiography being another way of asserting his identity. He mocked other Dalits who gave up their surnames and those who used family Gotra names instead of their surnames. He says, quote, they find that the easy way out. Behind all such acts and anguish of identity crisis, which has come about as a reaction to the blatant inhumanity of casteism, Dalits want to join the mainstream of society after getting an education, but Savarna prevents them from doing so. Quote unquote. In his autobiography, Valmiki tells how Dalit intellectuals are sometimes scared of publicizing their identity. According to him, they are constantly involved in inner conflicts. These fears are so deep seated within them, they are scared of leading a normal life despite being highly educated and well read. If this is the plight of a Dalit intellectual, you can very well imagine the condition of an ordinary Dalit. The point Valmiki tries to make here is that the Dalits are involved in a constant battle. Joothan cannot be dismissed as just an autobiography by a Dalit. It's much, much more than that. It is also about the social setup we are all part of, how marginalized groups enter history. It's a literary analysis and a literary theory combined into one. Valmiki has constantly protested against the Brahminic hegemony that exists in the society. He gives an instance in his autobiography where his father questions the schoolmaster who forced young Valmiki to sweep the school compound. There is another powerful example of Dalit consciousness that he gives when his mother refuses to accept the Joothan or scraps of food given to her. He continues with the examples from the epic Mahabharata and says, quote, I too have felt inside me the flame of Ashwadhama's revenge. Quote, unquote. His protest against Brahminic hegemony continued with his participation in Dalit movements. He says, quote, the more active I became in the Dalit movements, the more suspicious people around me got, as though I was working to destroy their hegemony. Most of these suspicious people were Savarnas. I began to notice the effect of the surveillance among my fellow employees too. Quote unquote. Joothan is the autobiography of a Dalit that tells us how the caste identity of a Dalit continues to haunt him throughout his life. Even if he is an educated man or not, the caste identity continues to haunt him. Joothan is dedicated to his father and mother, both who defied humiliation and who dreamt about giving their son a good education. It also reminds us of those hundreds of Dalits who, right from the time of their birth, suffer from insults and continue to dream for a better future. The next and the last autobiography in this module is titled Changiya Rukh by Balbir Madhopuri. So let's begin. Balbir Madhopuri is a Punjabi writer. He was born in the Dharmi sect of the Dalits in Punjab. A journalist, translator, and also a poet, he is a multifaceted personality. His poetry collections include Tree of the Desert that came out in 1992 and The Inferno that came out in 1998. He is a civil servant with the Government of India and also the editor of the Punjabi edition of the magazine titled Yojana. His autobiography, titled Changiya Rukh, is the first Dalit autobiography to be written in Punjabi. Its English translation, titled Against the Night, came out in the year 2010. Now, a little bit about Sikhism before we delve deep into the autobiography. Sikhism was different from other religions in India for its rejection of caste and idol worship. Gurudwaras are popular for its all embracing nature, irrespective of caste, color, or race. But following independence, a new form of capitalist culture spread across Punjab, which resulted in the rise of powerful Jats. They formed the majority in Sikh community. In Punjab, historically, Valmiki, Chamar, etc. were outcasts. They were denied ownership of land. They lived in temporary structures in the margins of the village. And Madhopuri belonged to Ard Dharmam, and he considered that his source of power. Aditharm were mostly people from Chamar community, and they went on to become one of the most progressive, politically active community among Dalits. Moving on to the autobiography, let's begin with the title because it holds a lot of significance, like both the previous autobiographies. The title of the autobiography carries great significance like the previous ones. Changiya Rukh means a tree lopped from the top, slashed and dwarfed. The image is metaphorical. Madhopuri refers to the Dalits whose potential for growth and progress is stopped by the upper caste. In the beginning of his autobiography, he recalls his past and how the people of his community were segregated and separated from the rest of the village. They lived in the periphery, far removed from the village. According to Madhopuri, to be born a Dalit in India is a sin. He says, quote, "If a low caste boy were to come out on the lanes of the village, all bathed and dressed in new clothes, his hair combed, one or the other of the Jats sitting under the tree would get up and throw mud on him. If he protested, he was sure to be beaten up." Quote unquote. Madhopuri goes on to narrate his life story without a tint of exaggeration. He describes how the community was terribly oppressed by the religion and traditional hegemony. Even the living spaces were clearly marked out. Upper caste lived in Pind or village, and the lower caste lived in Vehra or Chamarli. These were the outskirts. Madhopuri explains this location. Chamarli were the narrow rows of Dalit homes on the western periphery of the village. The second reason was that the dirty water from the village flows towards the west, which is also the lower part of the village. There were separate wells, temples, and cremation grounds for two segments of the village. Madhopuri recalls how they were denied access to drinking water from the pipe and were only allowed to drink water from lower levels, whereas the cattle of the upper caste drank water straight from the pipe. He says, quote, "It hurt me to think that we were considered worse than animals. Even dumb animals are accepted and considered better than us." Quote unquote. Even the Gurudwaras changed under the control of the Jats. Dalits were not allowed inside the Gurudwara. Sadhus never visited the homes of Dalits. Madhopuri regards himself an atheist now. The autobiography comes alive through a host of characters. The author comes in as a sensitive boy exposed to the sufferings. He is a victim. Then there is Dadi Haro. She's a force of nature, a powerful personality. Even the upper caste comes seeking advice from her. The courageous woman, Bhagya, who is a disappointed, helpless father of the author. His mother and Bua means aunt, who are women surrendered to their fate but ready to face it with courage. Madhopuri narrates his emotional experience of facing insult in public places. His father worked for the zamindars who treated their animals better than the Dalit workers. Madhopuri says, quote, "We would go to the houses of the zamindars, sit in their courtyards, and put out our bowls for rotis. Their women threw their rotis from the top, and we would adroitly catch them." Quote, unquote. School is another social institution where a child is reminded of his caste, and this is what we listen to in both the previous autobiographies. Poverty haunted his household, but after joining college, he was exposed to better things and better opportunities. He even started writing poetry. His poems were protests against the capitalist structures and expressed his disappointment. He joined the Food Corporation of India in 1978 and moved to Delhi. But with emerging financial problems, he had to start living as a tenant. Here again, his caste came into picture. Despite being an educated government employee, he was denied a house for rent because of his caste. He writes, quote, "The curse of the caste had followed us to the city, though it is said that people living in cities are educated and open-minded." Quote, unquote. Changiya Rukh makes us think on the concept of trauma. What do you think people like Madhopuri, Valmiki, Limbale, and hundreds of other Dalits whom they represent go through in their daily lives? How does it affect them in a long term? Guy T. Erickson, an American sociologist, says, quote, "Trauma will arise not only from an acute event, but also from a persisting social condition." Quote, unquote. Dalits are therefore victims of trauma. They are victims of a persisting social condition called the caste system. This marks the Dalit autobiographies too. The traumatic realism is therefore the sufferings and pains they have been through. Traumatic realism is achieved when the individual sufferings are linked to the scars on the social body. When Madhopuri says, quote, "I thought of the time when I was transplanting paddy. Images of dry turds, stinking cow dung, twigs, grass, and thorny bushes of berries in the water, and my own body twisted and bent like a question mark flashed before my eyes." Quote, unquote. That was traumatic realism, connecting individual sufferings to the scars on the social body. The verbal assaults they have been subjected to is another matter of concern. When upper caste men say, quote, "You are dirty because you drink dirty juice," quote unquote, or "Give those charmer brat a shout and drive them off." Traumatic realism moves from scars on social body to scars on the mind. Dalit autobiographies, as we stated in the introduction, are not celebration of the self, instead it's a lot more. It's reclaiming their identities that has been tortured and abused for a very long time. Writing these autobiographies takes a lot of courage because they have to relive all those experiences. And this act has surely shaken the ground, and the tremors are going to continue for a very long time.
That brings us to the end of Module 4. Before we wrap up, let's quickly revisit the main points we discussed in this module. We started off this module by discussing Dalit autobiographies, the context in which they were born, how different they are from the autobiographies that celebrate self, and how different the language would be in Dalit autobiographies. Then we moved on to discuss three Dalit autobiographies. The first was The Outcast by Sharankumar Limbale, the second being Joothan by Prakash Valmiki, and the third and the last one by Against the Night by Balbir Madhopuri. Though these autobiographies were written by three different people set in three different time periods, they all share a lot of common features between them. They all talk about oppression. And this is why I said in the beginning that we can draw parallels between a Dalit autobiography, a feminist autobiography, and a black narratives, because they all talk about oppression. And you must understand that for a Dalit, the act of writing itself is an act of protest. It's a way of reclaiming their identities. So that's all for Module 4. And as usual, as I say, if you have any doubts or if you need any clarifications, please feel free to comment below. So till we meet the next time with the next module, thank you so much for listening.